Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner told the Senate Finance Committee today that a proposed bank tax would target mostly riskier firms. For more on that tax and what it means for the banks, we are joined by Doug Elliott. Doug was an investment banker for more than 2 decades and was a founder of the Center on Federal Financial Institutions. He's now a fellow at the Brookings Institution, focusing on public and private financial institutions. He joins us from Washington. Doug, welcome back to Bloomberg. Always good to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Doug, Secretary Geithner told the lawmakers today that the U.S. favors taxing the financial risk that banks take rather than imposing a levy on profits, which the IMF has proposed. Is he right?
I think it is the right way to go. Right now, one thing we worry about is that we might put too heavy a burden of new regulation and taxes on the banks that we need to provide credit. If you can find a way to tilt the taxation away from the deposit-taking activity and the lending activity, as they're proposing, then it'll discourage the riskier activity while not discouraging what we most want them to do.
But isn't this tax applicable to just the biggest banks and, the institutions that are really back to reporting maybe windfall profits is too extreme of a way? But, we're just coming off this quarterly earnings season where we heard all of these firms, most of them that took, TARP money doing so well. What's the big deal if they have to pay back a little more, right?
Well, fundamentally, I agree with that. You're talking about an industry that has underlying earnings of several $100 billion a year and compensation of another maybe $200 billion a year. There's a lot of money here to cover, say, $10 billion a year in taxation or $9 billion a year. So this can be handled, but nonetheless, let's try to do it in a way that has the least burden and discourages things we want to discourage a little bit and at least doesn't discourage things that we most want them to do.
So you'd expect a lot of wrangling over how a bank tax will ultimately look like in Congress. What's the best way for this proposal to take shape? What will it ultimately look like in the end?
I wish I knew the answer to that. It may end up in some somewhat simpler form. There are certainly concerns about some of the technical aspects of what's been proposed. But I do think something should be done. We owe it to the taxpayers, and the industry can handle it.
Right.
And I do think it'll go through.
Doug, in about 15 seconds, talk to me about whether or not this is going to fulfill the administration's promise that the taxpayers are going to get their money back in about 10 years.
I think the taxpayers will get repaid from the TARP. Now, Fannie and Freddie's a different and potentially much bigger thing.
All right, Doug Elliott, a fellow at the Brookings Institution. Doug, it's always good to have you on. Thanks so much.